This is our third message in our fairly new series. I think I can still say it's a new series since it's only the third message in our series called Prophecy to Promise. The first book that we started as we cover a couple of books is the book of Daniel. Today we'll be entering on to chapter 3 of the book of Daniel. And if you've missed anything, as I said, and I will say this for a little bit longer, but if you missed anything, you can go back and watch online through our Facebook page or even my YouTube page. But as we enter into Daniel chapter 3, this is a famous story. So you're in for maybe a familiar story that you've heard many, many times in your life. Maybe this is new to you. But this is a fairly familiar story. As a dad who has tried his best to raise Christian kids, you try to get different things in order to help teach them Bible stories. And one of the things that there's probably a generation of Christian parents that introduced their kids to a show called VeggieTales. And in VeggieTales, this is one of my kids' favorite shows, or one of their favorite movies in VeggieTales was recapping this scene, Rack, Shack, and Benny, if you're familiar. Instead of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Rack, Shack, and Benny and the giant chocolate bunny. As they told this story from chapter 3 of Daniel, retold the story of chapter 3 of Daniel. But we're going to continue on and do it the actual biblical way, not the Rack, Shack, and Benny, although I do appreciate the easier way of saying Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But before we start reading chapter 3, let's review real fast what happened at the end of chapter 2. God gives King Nebuchadnezzar a dream and Daniel the ability to interpret this prophetic vision of these four powerful kingdoms that are going to come simultaneously and overpower the next kingdom and take over them and kind of rule the kind of inhabited world at that time. And so these four kingdoms are going to come and kind of replace, and each one replacing and being stronger than the next. And then all of a sudden in this dream, William, I have a picture. And in this dream, all of a sudden a rock will come that was cut not by man, but by God, who is going to be, it's a spiritual kingdom that's going to be set up, that is going to be stronger, larger. It's going to take up the entire earth, and it's going to be eternal forever. That's going to come and it destroys this statue that represents these four kingdoms that we covered again last week. And God gives Daniel the ability to know this dream without Nebuchadnezzar giving him this dream. And then he also gives him the ability to interpret this dream and understanding what this dream means. And he tells King Nebuchadnezzar about this. And Nebuchadnezzar has this massive heart change. And we read that in Daniel chapter 2, verse 46 through 49. So again, as a reminder, we're going to read that together. It says this, then King Nebuchadnezzar threw himself down before Daniel and worshipped him. And he commanded his people to offer sacrifices and burn sweet incense before him. The king said to Daniel, truly your God is the greatest of gods, the Lord over kings, a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this secret. Again, so I want you to just kind of really focus on that line in verse 47 of King Nebuchadnezzar's heart and this change of heart that he has, that surely God, your God is the greatest of gods, the Lord of all kings, the revealer of mysteries. Then the king appointed Daniel in a high position and gave him many valuable gifts, and he made Daniel the ruler over the whole province of Babylon, as well as chiefs over all of his wise men. At Daniel's request, however, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel's boys, to be in charge of all the affairs of the province of Babylon while Daniel remained in the king's court. And so Daniel gives Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego the ability to rule over the affairs of Babylon. Okay, that would be like a governor. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are now governors over regions of Babylon. Again, these were captives. These were captives, taken captive, all right, from Israel, Judah, actually, that God is now put in a place to oversee and rule the Jews that are in Babylon. So now God's Jewish people now have their own people ruling over them in a foreign country in captivity. That's pretty amazing how God can do that in like 3 years. 2 to 3 years this happens. We're not certain how much time passes between chapter 2 and chapter 3 of Daniel, because King Nebuchadnezzar seems to have forgotten what he says in verse 47, chapter 2. He seems to have forgotten all about that. And so some suggest that there may have been as much time as 20 years that have gone by between chapter 2 and chapter 3, while others say that it followed almost immediately after chapter 2, comes maybe a year later, chapter 3. I have no idea, and no one really knows. It's just very odd to see how Nebuchadnezzar can go from one moment saying, oh man, this is the God of gods, to what he does next that we're about to read. Nebuchadnezzar certainly had an aim and aspiration to consolidate his power, and he wanted to unite his rapidly diversifying empire that he has. I want you guys, as we look at this story, I want you just to see how this is the perfect illustration for God's gift to us of free will. How this is, a perfect illustration of what we do with free will. God gives Nebuchadnezzar the ability to have this knowledge and understanding that he is the God of all gods, that he is the King of all kings, and Nebuchadnezzar then bows and says we're offering sacrifices and offerings to this king. He is the king, and then within a year or even 20 years, whatever it is, he's forgotten all about it and turns his back against the same God that he was just declaring King of Kings. And I think about that, and I think, don't we do the same thing? Aren't we guilty of doing the exact same thing? We love God in a moment, we celebrate God in a moment, and then at a drop of a hat sometimes, we'll cast him aside, and we'll worship other things. And so as we look at this story, I want you just to continue to put yourself in this story and figure out where you fit into this story. Okay? Regardless of how much time has passed between these two chapters, one thing is clear. Daniel and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are not done with the trials that God has laid out for them to go through. Yes, King Nebuchadnezzar had acknowledged the superiority of their God, and they were then put in positions of authority, which they were in, but all of that is coming to a screeching halt here in chapter 3. So let's go ahead and read Daniel chapter 3, verse 1 through 7. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then he sent messages to the high officials, officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial, I got that, officials to come to the dedication of the statue he had set up. So all of these officials came and stood before the statue of King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald shouted out, "People of all races and nations and languages, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments, bow to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." So at the sound of the musical instruments, all the people, whatever their race or nation or language, bowed to the ground and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. It's crazy how narcissistic someone has to be to have a dream of a statue with a golden head of his head, and knowing the warning that God had given him of his downfall, and that he was king, that God was the king over all kings, and then to take that dream and that golden head that's on the top of that statue, and then to make an entire replica, forcing people then to bow to that statue and worship it. It would seem Nebuchadnezzar deliberately made an entire gold statue to say that the day of his reign and authority would never end, while trying to ignore and contradict God's prophetic future. Many things are unclear about this statue. For instance, what prompted the king to build it? Was it his vanity? I don't know. It doesn't really give us. What did the statue look like? Many believe that it's a picture of himself. It's a massive statue of his body, the king's body. or that it represented his kingdom, and it was like a stylized obelisk, like the Washington Monument or something like that. Regardless, it was massive, being 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. And it's safe to say it was not made of solid gold, but probably just overlaid with gold, which is still insanely valuable. That was the method, however, of the ancient world, not to make things of just solid gold. There is one thing that we do know for sure. Nebuchadnezzar's motive was to test his subjects' loyalty. Again, remember that they're bringing in all of these captives from all different nations and races and creeds, and they're bringing all these people together, and they're putting them into one nation and are ruling over one nation. So it was important for them to have something that was a unifying factor. And he wanted to test his subjects' loyalty, especially those he's been putting in charge. Either the leaders under him would be loyal to him, as demonstrated by their obedience to worship this statue, or they would die a fiery death. We experience something similar to this, in my opinion, in our own world today. The world says that we must conform to what they say is right, or we will destroy your life as a retribution for your rebellion against what we say is right and your unbelief. I think the main question for all of us this morning that comes from this story is this: are you fully dedicated to God? Or are you willing to bow your knee to other gods? Who or what is your God? Do your actions, do the things you do, support your claims and allegiances to the Lord our God? There are a lot of people that claim Jesus is their Lord, but those same people also bow their knee to idols in their life. I can be guilty of that in many aspects of my life as well. There are three things, as I studied and prayed about this, there's three things that I feel are the things that draw us into an allegiance with an idol. Three things. Number one, that we see in this story with Daniel, is fear. We bow to idols because we're scared of what might happen to us in our life. And so we bow to certain idols in our life, just like the fear that Nebuchadnezzar used. The other reason that I feel like we bow to idols is because of the potential that this idol might prosper our life in some way. Because of prosperity's sake, we bow to idols. And the third idol that we bow to, and I think this is more new, it's a more new thing in the last probably couple hundred years, I could be wrong on that, but it's an idol that we take is because we want to be entertained in our life. And so we worship our knees, we bow down on our knees and worship idols because of the hope of it making us happy and entertained. Anytime these instruments played, you were required to bow and worship to this statue. Whoever did not worship would be cast in the fiery furnace. Nebuchadnezzar regarded the refusal to worship his image as treason to his nation and to him. Nebuchadnezzar was not a man who allowed lawbreakers to go unpunished. In ancient writings, not the Bible, Nebuchadnezzar was described as so devoted to justice that he did not rest night or day. The crowds obeyed Nebuchadnezzar, as we read in his command to bow and worship. And when they heard the music, they worshiped. They got on their knees and they worshiped that statue. And once again, these Jewish teenagers, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel, but in this case, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, their devotion to God was put to the test. Quick review. Why were the children of Israel, who are now captives, okay, these people of Judah, who are now captives in Babylon, why were they driven into captivity in the first place? Do we remember? Because they had been worshiping pagan idols and their gods, the idols of the gods of pagans. They were breaking the first commandment, which was, "You shall have no other God before me." As a reminder, because I think it's good for us to have these reminders in our life. Exodus chapter 20, verse 4 through 5, it says, "You must not make for yourself an idol of any kind or an image of anything in heaven, in the heavens, or on the earth, or in the sea. You must not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God who will not tolerate your affection for any other gods. That's first and foremost when he's laying out his law. First and foremost on there. Okay, now fast forward 860 years after Moses brought down the Ten Commandments. 860 years later. And look where they find themselves. In captivity. For what? Doing that. But guess what? They had done it multiple. I can't even tell you. I tried to chat GPT this to find out how many times did God catch them worshiping false gods. And it said it's too many. Cannot calculate. Okay? Too many times that they were caught doing this, breaking this commandment. And so they're in this place because of them worshiping false gods. And they're put in this place right now where they're given the choice. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are given this choice to worship these gods. Exodus 34:14, a couple chapters later, 14 chapters later, it says, you must worship no other gods, for the Lord, whose very name is jealous, is a God who is jealous about his relationship with you. God does not share his throne with anyone or anything. Of course, Nebuchadnezzar offered a very compelling reason for the people to worship him and to bow down to this idol, right? Worship this idol or die. It's pretty compelling. And he says, when all the people, it says in Scripture, when all the people heard this sound and this music played, people of every nation and tongue fell down and worshiped this gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. It's been suggestion that in this area where this was going on, there's probably around 300,000 people all bowing down and worshiping at this moment. 300,000 people bowing, and there were 3 men standing among 300,000 potentially. Can you imagine how terrifying that would be? To be the only 3 people standing while 300,000 people are bowing. Do you know who else was bowing? All the other Jewish people. All the other Jewish people were bowing, but there were 3 teenage boys that were standing because God was calling them not to just stand for their own allegiance, but God was calling them to stand for their people. To stand out so that their people know who is still God. The fact of the matter is that this world is desperately trying to conform us to its own likeness. And it is not above threatening grave consequences if we decline to be conformed. Indeed, this world will threaten us. It will tempt us to put something else above God on the throne in our lives. And if we decline, it will threaten us with even grave consequences such as financial ruin, social ostracism, jail time, and even death. But we must stand strong like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Let's go to verse 8. But some of the astrologers went to the king and informed on the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, long live the king. You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue when they hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments. That decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown in the blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar flew into rage and ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. When they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I have set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you'll be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power? Whew. Ugh. That's a pretty dangerous thing to say. Our 3 Hebrew governors make their stand. They stand among everybody. to not bow their knee to worship and to remain loyal to their God, the God of their ancestors. But certain wise men who serve a different master, again, if you remember 2 weeks ago, these people are into witchcraft and things like that. So that would tell me that they serve the evil one as their master. They point out the lawbreakers, these Jewish boys. These wise men had an obvious political motivation as well against these Jews who were promoted with Daniel over them. Again, there's a jealousy aspect here as well, right? That Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel got to be in charge of all these things, and we're not, so if I can undercut them and get them out, then I get to move into those positions. I'm doing the king this favor. These, again, take notice of the 3 Jewish men. What they did not do is they did not lodge a formal protest to King Nebuchadnezzar. It never says that. It doesn't say that they go to King Nebuchadnezzar and be like, hey, we want to worship. We're not allowed to worship any other god. Like, can we not participate in this? It just says, however, it just says that they refrained from sharing in the sin of idolatry. Their actions were not public, but neither were they hidden. These 3 Hebrew teens knew they'd be discovered, yet they obeyed God first and foremost. King Nebuchadnezzar interviews this disobedient Hebrew leaders, asking them, is this true? Give King Nebuchadnezzar a little bit of credit here. He did not accept the accusations or the hearsay from his advisors. He made sure that he personally interviewed the boys. And I believe that this was even a greater test for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It was one thing to stand in dissent at one moment, but then to be grilled and your feet put to the fire in front of the king when he's yelling at you and screaming at you and telling you, is this true or whatever, it's pretty hard it would be even more difficult, in my opinion, to make that stand. And Nebuchadnezzar warns them again because he's not about to tolerate losing face to these boys. Plus, he had made these guys rulers in his kingdom, and they deny him of this worship. Okay, I've given you, are you kidding me? I've given you the ability to rule. Look how kind and generous I am, and you turn around and spit in my face, and you can't just do this thing for me? How dare you do this after I've blessed you? You should be repaying me by what I've done for you in your life. Can you imagine the pressure on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to compromise? Man, if I just bow down, I mean, I get to stay in this position. I get to help God's people. I don't die. I mean, what's the big deal? I mean, I know God is king. I know he's king, but if I just do this, then what's it matter? I mean, see, everything is in front of them. They see this. They see what's laid out for them. They see their life that they could have if they do it. They see the life that they're going to have if they don't do it. They see the fiery furnace in the midst. I mean, they see everything ahead of them. Yet their fear of the Lord is greater than the fear of the furnace. The fear of the Lord is greater than their fear of the fiery furnace. Nebuchadnezzar responds, what God will be able to rescue you from my power? Clearly, King Nebuchadnezzar sees himself as the God of his life. Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. Yeah, love that. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. Verse 18, underline it. Underline it. You may not be an underliner or a highlighter. It is one that you have to have in your mind forever and ever and ever and ever. It needs to be one of the verses you go to all the time in your life. Verse 18, Daniel chapter 3. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. Those words have echoed through centuries, generation to generations, of what it looks like to be faithful and loyal to God. That we know God can save us. We know he can save us. But even if he doesn't, we will still not bow and worship you. The 3 Hebrew men insist that they will never worship the image and that they don't need to defend themselves before him either. our God whom we serve is able to deliver us. He is able to do what we know that is possible, that He can do this, because we belong to God. And in this statement, they showed their good understanding of God's power, that He has the ability to do all things. In fact, they knew God was able to save them if He wanted to. But, they say, but if God doesn't save us, which again shows us what submission to God looks like. We know He can, but even if He can't, I'm still submitting to Him. They knew God's power, but they also knew that they must do what was right, even if God didn't do what they hoped He would. Our trust is in what God does, not what we want to happen. We must trust and serve God even if we don't know our future. Christians, whether we live or die, we let God be the author of our story. They did not doubt God's ability, but neither did they presume to know what God's will was in this moment. They recognized that God's plan might be different from what their desires were. I have my own desires and dreams in my life, and I pray that they match up with God's will. But if they don't match up with God's will, I can't turn my back on Him and go against His will. Remember, early Christians were not thrown to the lions to be devoured and burned alive because they worshiped Jesus. They were thrown to the lions and into the fire because they would not worship the emperor as their God. Our survival is not God's only option for His glory or even our good. Our comfort is not God's only means to bless or build His kingdom. He will do what is best for us and His eternal purposes. In the Bible, there were people who were faithful to God and saw miracles, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But there were also people who were faithful to God and faced the sword to death. But we trust Him to do as He knows is right. And so we will do His will and trust Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. There is no other God who can rescue like this. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego again to an even higher position in the province of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar here acknowledges the greatness of their God once again. And he offers this decree of honor and respect for their God. See, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego surrendered themselves completely to God in their life, body, soul, and spirit. It was the kind of submission that Paul writes about in Romans chapter 12, verse 1 through 2, and he says, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect will of God. We're not presenting our bodies. I don't think we do a good enough job of presenting our bodies as living sacrifices if we are bowing our knee to other idols. Our fear of the Lord is measured by our obedience to God, even when it seems utterly crazy. Our fear of the Lord is measured by our obedience to God, even if it means that we know that we're going to be thrown into the furnace, the fiery furnace, where we are to be obedient to the Lord. But in our obedience, if God calls us into the fire, as He did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, He will be there with us. And He will do what is best in each of our situations. God has shown us that when He sent Jesus into the furnace of this world to give Himself for our sin, for your sin, for my sin, that He's willing to walk with us in the furnace. That's why He is trustworthy and worth our total surrender. Isn't that true in your life? William, can you put on that last song? And band, go ahead and make your way up here, please. Love on the Line. William, put that song on there, please. We're going to sing this song, but before we sing this song, go to the chorus, William. I just want you, for a second, to think in your head of why is Jesus worthy of my worship? What has he done in my life to make him worthy to be worshiped? I can tell you that there is not enough ink and paper in this world for me personally to have enough to write down all the reasons why he's worthy. He has redeemed me. He has saved me. He has restored me. He has been patient with me. He has loved me. He has been compassionate, merciful, just when I need it. He has been good. When I've turned my back against him, he's still been good. When I've run from him, he's ran after me. When I've ignored him, he's stood right by my side. He has always been faithful to me. Even when I bow my knee to things of this world, idols in this world like my cell phone, like my children, like my job, like other things in my life, even though I've bowed my knees and worshiped other gods, he still calls me his own and calls me to himself. When I've sinned, he runs to me and he forgives me. So I ask you this question. Why is he worthy to be worshiped alone in your life? What has he done in your life that has made him worthy of your worship? I can tell you this for a fact. With arms held high, I give my life for that reason, knowing that I am found in Christ. There's no greater reason for me to love Jesus and to bow to him than that reason alone right there, that I am found in Christ. You are found in Christ because of his sacrifice. And so I would ask you this last question. Why would you ever bow your knee to anyone else? Why bow your knee to anyone else or anything else in your life? May we have the boldness of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and not compromise to the things of this world, and that we would not bow our knee to no person or no thing in this world, but only to the King of all kings and the Lord of all lords, who we can sit in his love forever. Would you please stand?